everyone. This session is a deep dive workshop on potential and challenges of hydrogen energy in Asia and Pacific developing member countries, organized in collaboration with Innovation Norway and Norwegian Embassy. I'm Toru Ito of ADB Energy Sector Group. We are very pleased to have this exciting session today together with you. Wonderful experts will deliver excellent presentation and panel discussion to share their insights. At first, as an opening session, let me briefly explain background of this workshop. As you know, today, hydrogen has really great momentum globally, such as technology development and cost reduction. Lots of large-scale commercial projects are appearing in the world, including gigawatt-scale electrolyzer project planning. And the international hydrogen supply chain is under development in some region. ADB also started some activities to disseminate this emerging technology in our developing member countries. We have some workshops with member countries and experts and formulating Friends of Hydrogen to share information and make collaboration, and also conducting some studies with experts and preparing handbook for project officers. Hydrogen is versatile energy carrier. Hydrogen is required to be a part of energy mix to achieve carbon neutrality, especially for hard to decarbonize sectors like transport, industry, and buildings. Importance is it will contribute not only to CO2 reduction, but also stable power supply, energy security, and air pollution issues. There are lots of options to produce hydrogen and how to utilize it. I believe many countries can find out some potential benefits to apply hydrogen. It will depend on available natural resource, existing infrastructure, and solutions required in the country. One more importance is hydrogen can be applied in good combination with variable renewable energy, because long-distance transportation and long-term storage are available. It will contribute to sustainable energy supply and decarbonizing pathway. And also, blue hydrogen produced from fossil fuel with carbon capture and storage will also play an important role for energy transition. Of course, many challenges will be there, such as capacity building, policy regulation issues, building infrastructure, and financial issues, etc. But the benefit might be more than that. We should consider in long term and start considering now. ADB is willing to support our member countries to do so in collaboration with experts. This session includes excellent presentation from experts in world-leading companies and universities to introduce good product examples in developed countries, and also good study examples in our developing member countries. So we hope we will learn many things from them and enjoy this session. All right. Let's move on to the next. First of all, I'd like to introduce our co-organizer, Innovation Norway and Norwegian Embassy. We really appreciate your cooperation on this workshop. Today, we are very honored to invite Mr. Bjørn Jansen, Ambassador, Norwegian Embassy Manila, to deliver a keynote address. Ambassador Jansen, floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure for me to open this workshop on the use of hydrogen in Asia. Now, some of you in the audience may wonder, why Norway? Well, first of all, we are here to deepen our collaboration with the Asian Development Bank on hydrogen. And that collaboration is led by Innovation Norway in Singapore, already mentioned, which is the co-organizer of today's event. Secondly, as you all know, Norway is an energy nation. What you may not know is that 99% of Norway's electricity comes from renewable sources. And that's a good thing, because we use close to 25,000 kilowatt hours of it per person per year in Norway, one of the highest consumptions in the world. Now that number includes our industrial sector. And over the last 100 years, our economic and industrial development has actually been built on the shoulders of our hydropower installations, which still provide around 95% of our electricity production. Since the 1990s, Norway has been a part of a deregulated and integrated power market in Northern Europe, enabling us to use hydropower as balance power with our neighbors. Together with additional wind power being developed now, we can continue to supply Europe with renewable energy, also for hydrogen production. Now, a few years ago, when I first started hearing about hydrogen, I must admit I was a bit skeptical. Close to where I live in Oslo, there's actually a hydrogen filling station for cars. and I would be puzzled each time that I pass this filling station. My skepticism may also have been come from my own background in the oil business. But now there is no doubt. As nations come forward with net zero strategies to align with their international climate targets, hydrogen has come center stage all over the world. That is also the case in Norway, which has set ambitious goals for its cuts in its emissions. Last year, the Norwegian government announced a new hydrogen strategy. The aim of this strategy is to develop new low-emission technologies and solutions. Norway will grasp the opportunities presented by the green transition. International partnerships are a key to the success, and Norway is collaborating in regional markets in Europe, but also in advanced and ambitious markets such as Singapore, Japan, Korea, and elsewhere in Asia. Together with the Asian Development Bank, Norway has supported many projects to improve transmission and distribution infrastructure in Asia for energy access to the population and to enable the import and export of power. So one of the goals of today's workshop is to take the cooperation between Norway and Nepal one step further. The Norwegian government, in close partnership with industry and academia, is developing solutions to transform our energy exports from high carbon to low carbon through a combination of clean electricity from hydropower and offshore wind, production of green hydrogen, and also production of so-called blue hydrogen, which is the conversion of natural gas or oil with carbon capture and sequestration. The objective of this hydrogen workshop is to establish a foundation of knowledge and relations to build cooperation across government and agencies, academia and industry. In Norway today, more than 50% of all new cars are pure electric, and another 35% is electric hybrid. Some cars use hydrogen for power, but where we see the greatest need for hydrogen in Norway is in the commercial transport sector: trucks and buses, trains and ships. Hydrogen is also excellent as a battery for solar and wind energy to balance the grid. But doing all these things would require staggering quantities of the fuel, which is only as clean as the methods used to produce it. This will create many commercial opportunities. The well-known Norwegian company NEL dates its origins almost 100 years back, when their first electrolyzers were produced, in order to provide hydrogen to make ammonia for fertilizers. Today, NEL is establishing their presence here in Asia. I wish you all good luck, and we have high expectations for an enhanced cooperation between interested parties in Norway and Asia following this initiative. All the best for the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you so much for valuable keynote address. Definitely, we'd like to collaborate further in various ways to support our member countries. Let's move on to the presentations. We will have 5 presentations. After that, we will have panel discussion and Q&A. So please input your questions in Q&A box so that experts will respond later in panel discussion. All right. First topic is global momentum of the hydrogen energy development. We invited experts from Rollenberger Mr. Dieter Bielen, a principal at Rollenberger, Southeast Asia, and also Dr. Peter Kaznachev, a principal at Rollenberger, specializing in energy, infrastructure, and the public sector. Dieter and Peter, floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. So Peter and myself, we will present some views that we have on the global momentum of hydrogen development. Just as a quick introduction, Peter and myself work for Rollenberger. Rollenberger is a global strategy consulting firm, originally from Germany, but we are now present in more than with 50 offices worldwide. We work with our clients that are private sector companies, state-owned enterprises, governments, as well as international organizations. And we have a dedicated hydrogen practice. So as you can see here on this page, we have experience in hydrogen across the value chain. You can see some of our clients also that we've been working with. So we've been working with some of our clients on overall hydrogen strategies. What does it mean, for example, for utility companies? What does it mean, for example, for oil and gas companies in terms of their overall hydrogen entry or growth strategy? We've also worked specifically on certain parts along the value chain, on the production side, on the transport and distribution side, that we see increasingly important given the global momentum of hydrogen. And then, of course, also on the application and end use side, mobility, industry, energy. And then finally, at the bottom here, given that hydrogen, and especially green hydrogen, is still in its early stages, we would say, there's also a lot of public policy support that we have been working on with governments, with associations in terms of policies, regulations, building the necessary infrastructure and ecosystem for hydrogen to develop. Here you can see a snapshot of key hydrogen projects worldwide. It is not exhaustive. And I also don't want to go through each of them one by one. I think what we want to highlight here is that, yes, there's a lot of projects announced. A lot of them are in early stages or pilot phase, but there's a lot of momentum that we see globally in hydrogen. The largest projects that have been announced or that are ongoing are in Europe, to some extent also North America, Middle East, quite recently, a lot of larger projects being announced, and Australia. What we see less so far is Asia. Of course, there are hydrogen projects being announced, but I would say compared to other regions, Asia is a bit trailing behind when it comes to green hydrogen. So yes, there is a lot of discussion on hydrogen globally. It's a very hot topic. There's also a lot of misconceptions about hydrogen. I think sometimes hydrogen is seen as an energy source where it's actually an energy carrier. It is still more expensive, green and also blue hydrogen. So policies and governments still play an important role to create the right ecosystem. But we do think and are very convinced that hydrogen will play an important role, and especially also when it comes to the decarbonization. So what countries are doing in terms of developing the hydrogen ecosystem is, first of all, setting decarbonization targets. Hydrogen is part of the decarbonization objectives that countries have set, and I think setting those objectives is important overall. And for example, also in having carbon tax in place is also an important indirect enabler for green hydrogen. In addition to that, there are also direct and enabling supporting measures that governments all over the world are taking to support hydrogen. For example, in terms of direct measures, there's capex subsidies, loan guarantees, etc. Also importantly, in terms of enabling support measures, there is support from the government in terms of hydrogen grid or port infrastructure development, refueling stations, and application stimulus, government procurement, and as mentioned also the CO2 pricing, R&D support. So there's a lot of different measures that governments worldwide are taking directly and indirectly to support hydrogen because it fits in the decarbonization agenda. I will not go through what every country is doing across different measures. I would say the most supportive government policies that we see so far is in Europe, the EU overall, but also Germany, some other countries in Europe. Here in the region, it's related more to Japan and Korea, and also increasingly the Middle East. Where you also see some big projects kicking off. Now, what does that mean in terms of demand? What we show here is the global electrolyzer capacity and also the ambitions for the electrolyzer capacity. And what you can see is that between now and 2025, quite a sizable capacity of electrolyzer is expected to come online, especially also this year, which means that by 2025, the global electrolyzer capacity is expected to reach 4.6 gigawatts. Now, that is a rapid growth, and that's because in the last couple of years and also in the short term, there's a lot of these projects ongoing that I already mentioned. Hydrogen is a hot topic. There's a lot of government support for that. So it is leading to a rapid growth of electrolyzer capacity. But then if you look at what the ambition is of some of the countries by 2030, it is way beyond that. EU has a target of 40 gigawatts. We have countries like China, US, Middle East. So this is a very high ambition beyond 2025 that will need to be realized. Peter?
Yes, thank you, Dieter. And another aspect of the whole hydrogen development is the reduction in costs. This is very important given that without that, there will be no increased rapid proliferation of this technology. And what we anticipate is that in the medium to long term, the costs of green hydrogen production are expected to decrease, getting increasingly competitive with blue hydrogen. And speaking of which, the blue hydrogen developments will be extremely important for Asian countries. If you look at the graph on the next slide, with LNG exporters globally, the top LNG exporters, you can see that among them, there are several Asian countries, such as Malaysia, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Brunei, and they have, of course, a significant potential to capture the blue hydrogen market niche, because the LNG infrastructure can be developed to transport blue hydrogen. I'll give you one example, and by the way, this example is also very relevant to Dieter because he is indeed based in Malaysia, and the example is Malaysia. Please, next slide. The example is that Malaysia is already, of course, an important leader in LNG exports. It's in the center of the region with some of the main importers of liquefied natural gas, such as Japan, China, South Korea, and India and Taiwan, which account for 62% of global LNG imports. So it's right there in the center of the LNG trade, and due to the fact that it is an exporter of an LNG, it has sufficient port infrastructure. So the infrastructure for the energy trade already exists. And that makes Malaysia potentially a platform for rapid development of blue hydrogen sales. And not only the production and sales of blue hydrogen, but what accompanies the process, very importantly, is of course CO2 capture and storage. And what we see is that on the global map of CO2 storage potential, Asia has a very significant place as well. Several Asian countries will already have a lot of CO2 storage potential, and that technology will develop. And you can see that some countries are in the top in the broader region in storage capacity, which leads us to some important conclusions about the overall market. In particular, yes, the strong regulatory support will push the adoption of hydrogen technology first in Western Europe, EU, North America, but then in Asia. That support, that regulatory support, will not last indefinitely. It will ramp down roughly after 2025 towards 2030. First of all, areas with low green and blue hydrogen production cost located near hydrogen demand will see the biggest growth. And those areas include, for instance, such countries as Spain, the North Sea for the European Union, and so on. As I already mentioned, costs will go down rather quickly. And the competitive hydrogen economy will therefore develop also rather rapidly between 2025 and 2030. The standard to reach competitiveness for hydrogen will be the mega projects. First with subsidies, but then gradually also without subsidy. They will be able to fly, so to speak, on their own. And green hydrogen will become progressively dominant for new production capacity. First, again, in geographies with incentives, Europe, US, maybe China, and then beyond. And as mentioned, blue hydrogen will be also on the increase. The production will be increasing in countries where infrastructure is sufficient and developed, and especially in a number of Asian countries. So let's stay tuned and follow those developments in the coming years. Thank you very much.
This is very informative presentation to understand the latest momentum of hydrogen energy in the world. Thank you very much. This momentum is real, very rapidly expanding, so we should keep watching. Thank you so much, Dieter and Peter. The next topic is hydrogen energy commercial application examples in the developed countries and recommendation for DMCs, developing member countries. We invited two world-leading companies. First is DNV, global company headquartered in Norway. We invited Ms. Nicola McFarlane, Principal Low Carbon Lead in Australia, DNV. Nicola, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be able to join you all today in this discussion. And today I'll be speaking about potential hydrogen applications, taking from what's happening here in Australia, and then the shift for those to be able to be used and recommendations for the initial applications in which hydrogen could be used in our APAC region and in developing countries. So just quickly on DNV. So as a global technical advisor and assurance company, we are very much supporting the drive for scaling up of the hydrogen economy. A lot of research and development, as well as testing, is being done by my colleagues in DNV globally. And we're also supporting both governments and industry in looking at the strategy of how the transition can be realised and how we can all move to decarbonise the energy systems. So with that, I'll just touch on, we see there's 4 key enablers to realise this, and I appreciate the previous speakers have all so touched on these. So what we need to be able to cover is safety, and safety is paramount in realising how hydrogen can form a part of the energy vector. And a lot of testing is being done to see how it reacts in application. DNV has also got at our full-scale test facility in Spade Adam, we have a hydrogen street where we're looking at how it works through the gas distribution network and into houses for residential application. And then, of course, it speaks to infrastructure. So can we repurpose our gas infrastructure globally to support using hydrogen as an energy carrier and in a gaseous form? And then decarbonisation of production. So currently the uses of hydrogen by industry globally are from hydrogen produced from fossil fuels. And so to support decarbonisation and climate change, we will need to then looking at blue hydrogen from gas reforming, supported by carbon capture and storage, and ultimately green hydrogen from renewable electricity generation and electrolysis. And so bringing the cost for this down is critical in being able to scale the hydrogen economy globally. And then finally, to enable this, of course, we'll take government support, subsidy and supporting incentives to enable the scaling of it and to enable the scale to allow for the cost to come down. Okay, so hydrogen in Australia. So as globally, there's been a lot of activity of late around how hydrogen can play a role in decarbonisation and as an energy carrier. Here in Australia, we have our hydrogen strategy that was published by the federal government in 2019. And that has really seen a rapid growth in the number of development projects that are being explored here in Australia, looking right through to on a gigawatt scale with the drive and ambition to be a major exporter of hydrogen or green ammonia looking into the future. So, but what I'd like to highlight here is that this is still in the initial stages of development. So a lot of these projects are still under development, and there's only a few which are moving into construction now. And of those in operation, the largest electrolyzer in operation in Australia today is a 1.25 megawatt electrolyzer, which is part of a project for blending into the gas distribution networks. So looking at what the initial uptake of application for hydrogen is, and this is really speaking to the areas where first we'll be able to reach and approach cost comparity as an application. And so what's being done here in Australia is a lot of support from the government in these initial demonstration projects, and that's allowing them to actually move into a construction and operation phase. So recently we had government funding to support some 10 megawatt projects. So there's a couple that are looking at blending into the gas distribution networks to offset some of the natural gas there from green hydrogen through electrolysis. And then also as another application, we're looking at where you can use hydrogen for industry. So as the feedstock, where currently brown hydrogen is being used, or this can then be replaced by green hydrogen to offset the carbon emissions. So Yarra Pilbara, with their ammonia fertilizer production, they are starting with a demonstration of a 10 megawatt electrolyzer project where they will have green hydrogen produced on site to then support the ammonia production. In another application, which is getting funding to support it, it's for transport. So it's been seen that this is one of the initial applications where it will reach cost comparity soon. And so there, one of our mine sites is a remote application. We'll use green hydrogen for fueling of their coach fleet to move people around the mine site. And so this is speaking to remote application of green hydrogen as a fuel instead of replacing diesel. And so then that speaks to being able to use it for transport application. So how does that now translate to supporting in developing countries as well as Australia is looking to use it? So I guess the three sort of key ones I want to speak about today are the use of it as the feedstock for industry. So are there applications which can be seen to be commercially viable where you can offset the fossil fuel produced hydrogen as a feedstock with green hydrogen from renewable sources? And so that's where you've got your offtake readily there to be able to translate that energy value chain and use the green hydrogen. Now, for Australia specifically, it's really, I mean, as a vast country with a lot of remote communities, there's the looking at hydrogen as a microgrid in terms of being able to have power to power, and then also as use of storage with supporting the variable renewable electricity generation. So a lot of work is going into those hybrid systems of saying you're taking the renewables and then you've got the electrolysis and fuel cell technology being developed so that you can create a system there to ensure that you have the energy security in terms of being able to store the hydrogen and then relay that back into power when needed to support the renewable energy generation. And that will be beneficial, as in Australia for remote communities. That will be also an application that would also speak to the archipelagic countries where the islands and remote application would also be potentially a viable option for use. And then also in terms of transport application. So this is where we're seeing replacing diesel for heavy fuel vehicles, or also looking at both ferry boats and other maritime applications for it, as well as where I've demonstrated it could be used for mining for the heavy fuel vehicles there as well by industry. And so these are sort of the sort of key aspects that could be in the shorter term, the initial stepping stones for the hydrogen application, and then with the end goal of potential for export as being looked at and the full value chain for that being realised. So thank you so much for your time today. And I know we only have a brief session, so there's only so much we can cover. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicola. Very nice presentation. It's very good to know ongoing project examples in Australia and very important insights on hydrogen energy application for developing member countries. Thank you very much. So second company on this topic is CUMMINS Corporation. Maybe for some people, well known as Hydrogenics. We invited Mr. Alan Nice, Global Business Development Director at CUMMINS Corporation. Alan, hand over to you.
Good. Thank you, Toro, and thanks to the ADB for inviting me. I was one of the, I think, first presenters probably close to 10 years ago talking about hydrogen at ACF, and we've come a long way in this industry. It's been pretty tough, but thanks to the ADB for having insight to look at hydrogen, and thanks to the Norwegian Embassy. In my background, we've got some nice trucks running in Norway, delivering groceries, running on hydrogen and fuel cells, and I think Norway, yeah, has been definitely a leader in this sector. But needless to say, I'd like to just give some quick insight. Cummins, we're the world's, by far the world's largest heavy-duty engine supplier, and as noted, I came from the hydrogenic side. So it's interesting to see that the world's largest engine supplier is investing heavily in hydrogen, as they believe moving forward that application will be very important towards energy transition, where hydrogen will lead the way in heavy-duty transportation applications, be it trains, trucks, buses, or other heavy-duty engine applications. So that's where we are today as part of Cummins. In terms of the ecosystem, we're the only company with both production in electrolysis. We have storage in a JV with a company called Mprox, and the different types of fuel cells. And I won't go too much into what we do, but just some highlights to show that, you know, we've been in this industry for a long time. We've been building fuel cells for 25 years. I mean, fuel cells are not new, although a lot of people may believe that, but you know, the applications in terms of scaling up are new. We know that, and we've worked with some of the biggest OEMs in the world in different applications: trains, trucks, buses, stationary power, etc. We've also been a world leader in electrolysis for over 70 years, deployed over 1,500 systems, 70 fueling stations, and learned a lot. You know, made mistakes, developed these large-scale applications, but we've really learned a lot in the industry. And we know there's new entrants coming in, but we believe we've got a lot of experience to help build up this hydrogen ecosystem globally. So what's happening? And there's been some great presentations about, you know, how this green hydrogen story is developing globally. Needless to say, a lot of people don't really point out that 70% of green hydrogen on average is actually the cost of energy. So that perfect wave has really happened because of this dramatic reduction in renewable costs. Now, of course, renewables are far cheaper than fossil fuels, but of course, hydrogen can be that glue where we're taking the excess renewables and converting it into hydrogen for industry, for transport, etc. And as you can see globally, you've got huge projects with Rollenberger, I mentioned, gigawatt projects, but what I like to point out as a discussion point in future is, with all these huge projects, lower renewable costs, would there be a market for blue hydrogen? I don't know. It's just an interesting topic that would be, you know, in another year, that would be an interesting topic to discuss in an open forum. But that's something interesting. With green hydrogen going where it is, will blue hydrogen even be viable? So not to put a finger on either one, but that's an interesting topic to discuss in the future. So the applications on fuel cells, and I'll focus a little bit more on that, but basically we see today trains, trucks, and buses as the primary applications today. Ships are starting or maritime are starting to be developed, and then eventually in the future we're also looking at airplanes. Obviously in the green hydrogen space, industry is the primary driver, ammonia being of course one of those key sectors, but I'll talk a little bit more on the mobility applications. But what I believe is today we still surprisingly have massive subsidies on fossil fuels. I think the reality is they've been around for over 100 years, and I think those subsidies could be potentially moved to hydrogen. At the end of the day, scale up and economies of scale will create massive cost reductions in this industry. Asia Pacific has very good PV and also in some areas wind resources. Thus, the ability to get to the goal of roughly $2 a kilogram, you know, comparative or even lower than fossil fuels, I think is viable in the near future. President Biden in the US has also announced what he's calling the energy earthshot for hydrogen, where the goal is towards $1 a kilogram. They're being far lower than fossil fuels. So there's a lot of interesting developments happening around the world that are worth watching and understanding and really grasping where this hydrogen story will develop, because it's really a story that's changing very quickly, as we know. In the fuel cell world, we're also seeing very good cost reductions. Where, you know, I look at fuel cells much like batteries maybe 5 or 10 years ago, where our cost reductions are being reduced in the range of 50 to 60% in the next 3 to 5 years. Of course, we have the green hydrogen costs being reduced. We're already seeing very close to TCO parity on trains, as one example. Buses in 2024 is expected, and Rollenberger has developed some really good models for us to understand this better. And I think it's really not just a competition. I strongly believe batteries and fuel cells will work together for a very long time. We today alleviate some of the range issues. We elongate battery life so we don't have to discharge the batteries as much, for instance, on a bus or a truck. And of course, temperature issues are essentially not a factor for fuel cells. So that we're fitting into some of the applications very well. And in the future, of course, with cost reductions, I think fuel cells will be a bigger part of the scenario as we move forward. So specific to Asia Pacific and developing Asia Pacific, I think there's what we might call low-hanging fruit, backup power, what we might call smaller grid stability. Of course, there's larger grid stability, but in Asia Pacific, you have countries with power issues, rolling blackouts. So I think backup power in telecoms, schools, hospitals, etc., could be using fuel cells today. Microgrids applications as well in terms of off-grid. And there's a lot of pilot projects that are happening around the world, which are proving the technology. And we just did a small project in Malaysia. I know that's not necessarily developing Asia, but a telecom off-grid telecom site a few years ago. So we proved that the applications can work today and they can be developed further. So decarbonizing transport, specifically, one thing interesting to note that actually fuel cells, because we use a lot of air, we actually clean the air in any environment as we move, as the buses, trucks, or trains move. So we strongly believe government support to promote zero emissions transport applications is very important. We did the world's first large fleet in buses, which was 74 for the Olympic site in Beijing. And you know, China, as we know, has really given a very strong impetus into zero carbon and fuel cell development, and is really one of the world leaders today. But stimulating local industry for this growth, I think, is important, even in developing countries today. So we've got partners in China, Thailand, etc., who actually also have a local impact. We're not just drop shipping our fuel cells or systems to a country. We actually have local integrators who take that and put in balance a plant and other materials into the systems. How can we develop it faster? So closing out is pushing regulatory and country organizations, as I mentioned, potentially moving fossil fuel subsidies to hydrogen could be an idea. Focus on range extenders for transport, leverage large fleets, localized integration, so there's local impact. And obviously with 2050 goals, hydrogen can create a lot of high-level jobs in any country, any developing country. And adoption of this, I believe, will create a lot of innovation, high-paying jobs, and also industry impact locally. I strongly believe that we in the fuel cell world are working with integrators all over the world where there's definitely a local impact and development for the systems. So that's basically my presentation, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for informative presentation, Alan. Indeed, area of fuel cell application is wide-spreading and production capacity is increasing dramatically. We do hope that our developing member countries can contribute to mass production of fuel cell products. And also, thank you very much for insightful message to member countries. All right. Next topic is hydrogen energy use case in DMCs, example of feasibility study and future project. We have two presenters. First is Mr. Stefan B. Harrison, founder and managing director of SBH4 in Germany. He's actually working with ADB on feasibility study in Pakistan and also supporting some local hydrogen activities for ADB with his excellent expertise. Steve, floor is yours.
Toru, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to go through my presentation very fast today. If you want to review the slides more slowly, you may download them from my LinkedIn profile or my company website. I would like to start by showing you the small area of broad hydrogen deployment that we have focused on through this particular study in Pakistan. We have really focused on what people refer to as green hydrogen, so renewable electrical power onto an electrolyzer, and the end use cases that we have focused on are energy. What I would like to say, most importantly, with this message, is there is still a huge number of places that further studies in Pakistan can address. We have just opened the door, and I hope that other studies will walk through and follow our example and look at other options for hydrogen, low carbon, low cost hydrogen production. For example, I say here, blue or pink hydrogen. There's been a lot of talk today about blue hydrogen from natural gas with CCS. Well, several countries in Asia, including Pakistan, have a nuclear power fleet, which produces low carbon electricity. And from that, we can generate low carbon hydrogen. That's an area that a future study could explore in Pakistan. We need to move quickly, but there's still time between now and 2050 to look in many other areas. Here's another technology that I would like to point out to you. Again, I've heard people today talk about green and blue hydrogen as low carbon forms of hydrogen. Well, what about turquoise hydrogen? Hydrogen that's produced from biogas, biomethane, or natural gas, fossil fuel methane, through methane pyrolysis or methane splitting, where we end up with solid carbon, coke or carbon black or graphite, and hydrogen. And if we do something responsible with that solid carbon, then again, we have a low carbon process. And with a lot of, as we heard from the Rollenberger presentation, with a lot of LNG moving around in Asia and Southeast Asia, the idea of using some of that LNG to produce turquoise hydrogen, locking that carbon into solid carbon, is, I think, a very strong case for some countries in Asia where CCS would not be possible. I think we've understood that CCS would be very possible in Indonesia or in Vietnam, but it's not going to be so easy in South Korea or Japan. So the solutions will be very, very local. But my point in showing this slide is there are many, many other areas that we can look at in subsequent studies in Pakistan. I would say that the area that we've looked at is perhaps the most challenging from a business case or a financial perspective. But what I'm going to show you later on in the presentation is that even though we focused in this most difficult box to find projects that make money, we've actually found some very, very good projects with really great financial and socio-economic benefits to Pakistan that I think would also have merit and be transferable to other developing countries within the region. We identified 13 potential projects and actually then put those into a sieve, shook the sieve very hard, discussed with a lot of stakeholders, and 3 came through. Some of the criteria that we used to screen those original 13 ideas were the energy policies specifically related to hydrogen that we were given by our stakeholders early in the project. So as I said, the focus was on green hydrogen. There's a chart here, I'm sure you've all seen similar in terms of how we can make green hydrogen and how we can store it and how we can use it. Nothing new for you here. But here's something that might be new for you. This is the power cost table, specifically in Pakistan. And as I was saying earlier on, nuclear power is the lowest. I say price and cost in Pakistan are not always well correlated, but nuclear power is the lowest price power. So to make hydrogen from that is perhaps not such a bad idea, low carbon. The areas that we studied, the 3 projects that we actually focused on, 2 of them were related to hydro. And as you can see, hydropower is relatively low cost here. And we also focused on a study that was solar. So these were the 3 studies that we chose. This is the kind of slide that I think you might want to read a little bit later on. But as I said, 2 of them starting with hydro, one of them related to energy storage, high up in the mountains where it's difficult to bring fuels in. Another related to gas grid injection, and another solar power to hydrogen, and again, gas grid injection. And what we're really trying to do here is to substitute imported LNG. Sorry to all of those LNG producers in the region, but it's expensive for a country like Pakistan to import LNG, paying in US dollars and using foreign currency reserves. If they can use their local resources of wind or of hydro or solar and make energy themselves, then there's a tremendous economic benefit for the country. So taking a look at one of those projects in particular, micro hydro, not big dam projects, run-of-the-river projects on very, very small rivers, very steep, mountainous, fast-flowing rivers, micro hydro projects. And what we were modeling here was basically to bridge the gap in winter when the water is frozen. Please remember that high up in the Himalaya, for 1 month of the year, the river does not flow. The river sits there in a frozen state. So the micro hydro can work for, let's say, 10 or 11 months of the year. We make hydrogen, we store hydrogen, we then use that hydrogen on a fuel cell again in December, in January, to make sure that there's power 12 months of the year, not just 10. Oh, by the way, in some of these cases came out very, very strongly in terms of socio-economic benefits and financial benefits also. Next one that we studied was solar power from the Qadi Azam solar park. What I'm showing you here on the photograph is some small solar panels way up in the mountains. The Qadi Azam solar park is approximately a 1 gigawatt solar park down on the flatlands in central Pakistan. And again, uplifting the power using power management technology or investing in additional solar power on the Qadi Azam solar park results in some fantastic business cases in terms of hydrogen production. The business cases get even better if we then use that hydrogen in the winter time to avoid purchasing LNG on the spot market where it's very expensive. Some of the international contracts for LNG supply to Pakistan are very, very cheap, and local natural gas is also quite cheap. What we really want to avoid is using natural gas in December, in January, is importing LNG in December, in January at spot market prices. But that means low cost, massive hydrogen storage in order to support that kind of business model or value chain. Another project that we looked at is large dam, the Ghazi Baroda dam, which is in the northwest of the country. Similar kind of concept, hydrogen for gas grid injection. The case here was not quite as strong as the other 2, I'd have to say, financially, but there are perhaps ways that we could relook at this case in the future, again, combined with large-scale hydrogen energy storage to make it more attractive. We sometimes talk about variable VRE, variable renewable energy. Solar, the sun shines, it doesn't. Wind, the wind blows, it doesn't. I just want to point out to everybody that hydropower is also incredibly variable. This is the water throughput on the Tarbala Dam. Here's the Tarbala Dam here, and at the peak of the water flow, when there's snow melt and monsoon rain, we've got excess water coming over the dam. And then in January, February, March, at the end of the dry season, this is what the dam looks like. It's empty, and the amount of water flowing over is very, very small. I really just want to remind everybody, hydro is also variable renewable energy, but with a totally different variability. It's seasonal, which again points us to very, very large scale long-term hydrogen storage, for example, in man-made salt caverns. And it's a bit like CCS. If you can do it, great. If your geology doesn't help you, you can't do it. But again, in Pakistan, we do have the opportunity, perhaps for underground salt caverns for hydrogen storage. We'd need to do some exploratory drilling and things like that. But this is an area that we actually didn't model, but again, could come back to in the future. There's so much more that can be done. And again, when we think about where are the dams, where's that salt, and where's the main population, we have a perfect storm of those things coming together in the central northern part of the country. So a great idea for future studies. Here's a summary of the key things that we have learned, or at least that I would have learned and I would like to share with you. Some of the learnings are very transferable internationally. Some of the learnings are very, very specific for the government of Pakistan. Again, perhaps this is the kind of slide that you'd like to read later on. In closing, low cost, low carbon hydrogen. I see it as one tool in the toolbox for decarbonisation. Carbon capture and storage is ideal for cement making and CO2 emissions. Carbon capture and storage will perhaps be required for power generation emissions from existing power infrastructure. We can combine those with blue hydrogen, great. But hydrogen in itself is one tool in the toolbox. Batteries, renewable electricity in its own right, lots and lots of tools in there. But we need to use hydrogen and all of these tools in the toolbox to help us decarbonize. For the children of Pakistan, 220 million people live in Pakistan, and for the children all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for impressive and forward-looking presentation, Steve. Study like this will be very important as a first step to identify hydrogen potential in the country. ADB is willing to support such study in collaboration with experts like Steve and other presenters today. Right. Our last speaker is Mr. Pushkar Mananda, ADB Senior Project Officer of Energy Sector in Nepal Resident Mission, and also Dr. Biraj Singh Thapa, Assistant Professor, Kathmandu University, Nepal. Pushkar and Dr. Biraj, hand over to you.
Okay, am I audible? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Toru-san. So today we are going to present on potential hydrogen use case in Nepal from excess hydropower energy. So which will be jointly presented by me and my colleagues from Kathmandu University in Nepal, Dr. Biraj Singh Thapa. So in today's presentation, so what I will be doing is I will be basically setting up the context on why hydrogen pathway for Nepal. Then I will pass the floor to my colleagues, Dr. Thapa, to explain other potential use case for Nepal and what he and his team is doing in Nepal, so which is more important. So to understand the potential adaptations of hydrogen technologies and applications in Nepal, so we also need to understand unique and complex energy sector situations of Nepal, so which is highly dominated by biofuels and waste and imported petroleum, despite of having tremendous hydropower potential. So as of now, like the total installed capacity of hydropower is as low as 1,332 megawatts, while its commercially exploitable potential is around 42,000 megawatts. So due to this, the share of electricity in its total final energy consumption is as low as 3.66%. But this also suggested that the potential to increase the electricity demand in total final energy consumptions is brighter, or the prospect is brighter. So given the lowest per capita electricity consumption in the regions. And to support in these endeavors, development partners like ADB and others are supporting Nepal in development of energy sectors and working closely with government and other stakeholders for efficient productions, distributions, and utilizations of hydropower resources, including promotion of various high-level technologies. For example, ADB is also supporting Nepal's and trying to explore hydrogen generations in Nepal. So ADB alone has mobilized around almost $1 billion in these efforts. It's not only for hydrogen, it's not for hydrogen, I mean, so it's for more on the generation, transmission, and distributions of the electricity that will be generated from hydropower. So okay, now let's see how the demand and supply of electricity look like in Nepal. So as of now, so the total installed capacity of the country is lower than the peak demand, which the country is forced to import the electricity from the neighboring India. But then the situation is likely to be very much different starting next year. So with the government plan of adding 629 megawatts, which will be 122% of cumulative capacity, installed capacity as of date. So with huge additions of the hydropower starting next year, this is a good news. But the flip side is that the lack of sectoral policies, the physical transmission and distribution constraint, and low export potential with economic viabilities in neighboring countries will enable, in absorbing those available electricity from hydropower, especially during the wet season. So we can expect that there would be a significant annual surplus of hydrogens, likely starting from next year. So which has prompted us, to think about generating green hydrogen from excess hydropower energies. So to understand the potential of green hydrogen potential productions in Nepal, ADB conducted a quick study in 2020, which tried to explore the potential prospect of deploying hydrogens, with fact in mind that Nepal faces electricity and fuel shortage despite of its abundant hydropower resources that have remained mostly underdeveloped. So we have considered 3 scenarios: scenarios 1, scenarios 2, and scenarios 3, with curtailment of 20%, 40%, and 40% of available energies, excess energy, available energy from the hydropower over the period of 2025 to 2030, and under each scenarios, the amount of surplus hydropower over the period of 2025 to 2030 is also calculated accordingly. So you can see. So in the 20% of hydrogen generation potentials, with curtailment ratio of 20% in 2025, so hydrogen generation potential is around 0.05 million tons. So which corresponding to hydrogen electrification potential is equivalent almost around 1,261 gigawatts, so which is 60% of total forecast electricity demand at that time. So this is not a small figure, and this is likely to increase over the time. And by 2020, so with curtailment level of let's say 40%, the quantity of hydrogen re-electrifications is equivalent to almost 20% of total forecasted energy. So in overall, so it suggests the positive results tends to suggest that a considerable quantity of electricity through re-electrifications of stored hydrogen is possible. So which can be considered as one of the potential use cases of hydrogens in Nepal. So to explain about other potential hydrogen use case in Nepal, I would like to hand over the floor to my colleagues, Dr. Biraj Singh Thapa.
Thank you. Thank you, Pushkar. I think you have set up quite a good background. On one hand, we see a lot of possibility of hydrogen and surplus hydropower. That's an estimation. But what is reality that Nepal is facing at the moment is the projection of use of petroleum products is quite high. As of now, we can see more than 6 times increase in demand of petroleum by 2050 than we are having in 2015. So this exponentially high rate of increase in petroleum demand is quite alarming. And on top of that, Nepal doesn't have any source of petroleum products. All the petroleum products are being imported from the other countries. And a heavily dependency on transport sector for these petroleum products, and particularly on diesel, is also quite interesting. While the rest of the world is trying to decarbonize their economy and switch over to hydrogen and other green sources for transportation, and particularly on hydrogen for diesel-based buses and trucks. Nepal's future, as of now, is moving towards more dependency on diesel from 7% to 18%. And that's quite alarming. And that is also an opportunity for us. If we made a strategic intervention, if we are able to plan to use our surplus hydro energy to the transportation sector and other sector by converting it into hydrogen, then the energy mix scenario of the future will be quite interesting, quite green, quite different than what is being projected. And that's where we are trying to work together with within the university, government, and business and funding agencies as well. Looking also on the projection of the overall residential sector energy demand, it's almost like more than 50% of the total energy being consumed is in residential sector. That means our industries are yet to be consuming energy. And more interesting is more than 50% of that residential energy is going for cooking. So most of the energy that we use is cooking, and that's why we are depending on biomass and other sources as a very high chunk of energy. Now, another projection is, why don't we switch to electric cooking? So many studies has been done, so many government projects are being launched, but the true fact is cooking by the electrical means is quite not very popular in Nepal, and that also seems to be continuing towards 2035, where more than double of energy for cooking is coming from fossil fuel, this LPG gas. So this is another domain. First is being diesel, second for LPG replacement, and third, we need quite a huge amount of urea production in Nepal. So this is a recent picture where people were standing for days, several days, to get one sack of urea fertilizer, and the demand is increasing quite high. There has been quite a big debate in Nepal from political to industrial scale. How should we produce urea? How should we get hydrogen that is needed for urea? Do it be from the natural gas imported from India, or shall we do it from electrolysis using the surplus hydroelectric power in Nepal itself? So that's another area where Nepal is having a heavy discussions, and there is a potential. One study that we did by Kathmandu University and my lab is projecting the cost of energy to produce hydrogen by the surplus energy. So what we think is, if you don't produce, you don't get any money for the electricity. But if you produce and if you sell it in the marginal price, then that would be something to roll in the economy. So what we found is, if the minimum price, what we call it 20% of normal tariff rate, the price is getting quite below, even below $1 on the off time. So this is something that if hydropower and the energy produced from hydropower getting surplus, if that cannot be exported, if that cannot be used in other energy intensive projects, just getting 20% extra on top of the normal tariff rate, I think producing hydrogen below $1 and using it for the different economic sectors could be viable, could be feasible. It's feasible now. We just need to have infrastructure, policies, and the things around it. So what we think in future for Nepal, at least, we are working together for different projects for green fuel for transportation, green power for re-electrification, green heat for cooking and for other heat applications, and green processes for mining, for chemical industries, and for urea production. So we are doing separate independent studies, at least at the academic level, and we are trying to put a business sector around it. So my university, Kathmandu University, has now started to lead on this research. We call it FIT, or team, fertilizer, industry, and transport, for starting the value chain from production, storage, distribution, and end use. The Vice Chancellor of University himself is the advisor of this lab. So we think this will be a kind of a kickoff for the nation itself. Government has given us quite a good response. Nepal Oil Corporation, NOC, is a sole authority in Nepal which imports and distributes all the fossil fuels. Every drop of fossil fuel is channeled by this company, but they want to transform themselves. We have been talking with them. They have already given us a very good project to develop Nepal Oil Corporation as a fuel producing and fuel exporting company in Nepal, changing themselves from fuel importing and fuel distributing company, utilizing a surplus hydropower, producing hydrogen, and establishing a value chain around it. So we have been working to formulate the guidelines. We have been working to make some demonstration project and establishing the research center inside university. So this is one of the key areas where government-based companies are supporting. So lastly, we think we want to scale it up. We want to, we have been discussing with government on a national scale project where we call it National Hydrogen Initiatives. So this is a 10 years program which carries a vision to convert Nepalese economy and Nepalese society towards the affordable green hydrogen technology. We have a mission to vision to reduce the petroleum consumption, to increase the efficient use of green energy in industrial sectors. And we are working together with government, with the funding agencies to make the policies, which we call National Hydrogen Roadmap. We are working to design and develop some national demonstration project on each green fuel, green heat, green energy, and green processes in context of Nepal, and developing some business incubation, establishing the minimum infrastructure, inviting foreign investments to produce, may it be ammonia, may it be hydrogen itself, may it be turnkey from hydropower to transportation sector infrastructure. So we are discussing with several funding agencies, like even the World Bank is interested on those kind of business projects. So this is where we are in the discussion. Nepal being a developing country, we do want to enter inside this big hydrogen momentum the global world is facing, are taking towards in the implementation. We do have a lot of hydro and even solar energy as a primary carrier with cheaper production rate in future compared to now, and surplus energy that's pumping up. That could be a primary driver to make this happen in future. So this is, I think, we are working together, we keep working together, and we hope something will happen in future. So that's where we want to share the message. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for a nice presentation, Pushkar and Dr. Biraj. I think it's very good example to utilize unused energy resource. The potential benefit looks very huge. I'm looking forward to seeing actual projects in Nepal. Now, all presentations have been finished. Let's move on to panel discussion. I'd like to invite Dr. Per Christel Lund, Science and Technology Counselor, Norwegian Embassy in Singapore. He will moderate discussion with experts. Dr. Lund, hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Ito-san, and thank you very much to all the fantastic presentations and introductions to this discussion as well. The panelists have taken us through the journey of the entire hydrogen value chain, I believe. Peter and Dieter from Rollenberger on the global situation and the drivers for hydrogen energy development on a larger scale, demonstrating that there's a number of countries that are seriously embracing hydrogen as a significant part of their energy infrastructure and a key tool for decarbonization. Nicola from DNV gave us examples from Australia, the big projects there, on their strategies and roadmap, becoming a central hydrogen player in Asia. She and also Alan from CUMMINS gave us some example of commercial applications in these areas, and also for developing countries, looking at industry sector as a feedstock for industry, for microgrids, energy to energy, and temporary storage, and not at least for the transport sector. And then I think we got two very inspirational presentations from Stephen in Pakistan, and from Pushkar and Biraj from Kathmandu or Nepal, on the ideas and concept for combining a hydropower with hydrogen for seasonal and also short-term energy balancing, and also for domestic utilization for industry, household sector, and transport. I'll ask the panel, or I think we should start the discussion a little bit on, maybe I should address this first question to Peter, Dieter, and perhaps also Nicola, looking at the developments around the world. Peter's slide number 2 showed the global map of large-scale projects, where there is a open field, a white part of the map in Southeast Asia. Based on your experiences from policy and policy advice, Why don't we have any large-scale projects in South and Southeast Asia, such as other places in the world? Is it because the technology or the industry is quite immature yet? Is it because we are don't have the available technology or the financing? Who wants to start answering this question? Maybe Peter, start first.
I think Dieter, would you give it a go?
Yeah, sure. Good question. So, I mean, first of all, Southeast Asia is a large gray hydrogen market. It's true that when it comes to green hydrogen, Southeast Asia has been lacking. It's not that there is no projects at all. There are some projects, for example, in Sarawak in Malaysia. There is hydrogen based on hydropower. You have a project in Thailand, for example, that is producing hydrogen from wind. So there are projects. It's not that there's no green hydrogen project at all, but it's true that if you compare it to Europe, North America, and also increasingly the Middle East, I would say Southeast Asia is lagging behind when it comes to green hydrogen. I think there's a few reasons for that. One reason is that in terms of government policy and also incentives, Southeast Asia has been less committing, I would say, to decarbonization and also hydrogen, green hydrogen, compared to, for example, Europe and Germany. And also the whole renewable growth. I mean, if we exclude hydro for a moment, if you look at solar, for example, is a quite recent phenomenon. It's really picking up only in the last few years. But it also shows that once governments become committed and want to drive green and, for example, renewables, that it is picking up quickly. Look at what happened to Vietnam's solar boom last year. So I think that's quite promising, that there's a rapid growth in renewables across Southeast Asia, but it is a very recent phenomenon, to be honest, except for large hydro. So I think with the growth of renewables, but also increasing government commitment for decarbonization, I think it will change. There will be more and more larger green hydrogen projects. Singapore, that is very concerned about energy security and decarbonization, is one element, but probably or much less on the production side, but on the R&D, transport, storage, and application side, Singapore will play an important role. Malaysia and Thailand are also looking at it. There's no overall clear hydrogen policy or incentives yet, but are all looking into playing a role there. So I think it will change, but it's true that they're lagging behind at this point.
Yeah.
And I would probably add that, it's like with liquefied natural gas, there was a slow development and many were skeptical, and then suddenly Asia boomed. I think that something similar may happen with blue hydrogen. As I said, the gas is there in many Asian countries, and the infrastructure, importantly, is there for blue hydrogen development. So those things can change quickly with modern technology and investment.
That's a very good point. Another element that I like to open up is also I think the success perhaps of the European movement into using hydrogen as part of their energy mix is also the tight integration, the regional integration of the energy systems between the countries. And we have already developed a well-integrated electricity grid. We already have gas pipelines crossing across the region. So looking at Southeast Asia, where there is also huge opportunities for integrating the energy markets or the energy systems, the electricity integration could be done, gas can be exchanged. You mentioned, Peter, the CCS or the carbon capture, at least the storage part, that also has to be a regional part. So how important would it be to have a more regional approach to a hydrogen deployment than that each countries have their individual, I can say, aspirations or initiatives? I'm thinking especially also back to the two last presentations, the cases from Nepal and Pakistan, where hydropower and the storage of energy or the excess energy that are seasonal can be better utilized if you have a larger integrated system. So hydrogen could be the bridge between electricity and perhaps the gas or the petrol fuel world. So how important is it to look at a regional approach to this rather than individual countries? Maybe Alan or Nicola, if you have some ideas on this. Alan?
Yeah. So yeah, I think that there's already a regional approach in some areas. You're seeing Australia, of course, having major initiatives to support North Asia through green hydrogen projects. Southeast Asia, it's in its infancy, I think. But of course, at the end of the day, what we're seeing globally is initiatives where you have very good renewable resources can be integrated with higher demand factors. So countries that have very good solar or wind can obviously produce the hydrogen and integrate that with the consumption areas such as Singapore, which is obviously using a lot of fossil fuels today, but potentially green hydrogen in the future. So I think that regional approach will develop over time. That it's in its infancy in Southeast Asia and other parts of Asia, but it's already being developed in other parts of the world. Beyond the Australia, North Asia corridor, you also see that already where there's major projects being looked at in North Africa, the Middle East, towards Europe as well.
Exactly. While you're there, Alan, I'd like to pick up a little bit on what your comments on the shifting the subsidies from the fossil fuel now, the massive amount into hydrogen. I fully agree with you that maybe in general the fossil fuel subsidies is a blocker or is a barrier to deployment not only of hydrogen value chain but also renewable energy. So instead of shifting using that subsidy, what about just cutting the fossil subsidies? Would that be sufficient economic incentives? Basically making renewable energy and hydrogen more competitive compared to the existing subsidized diesel, oil and gas production, etc.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I put that out, and agreeably, it might be a bit controversial, I'm not sure, but the reality is we need a bit of incentives to kick off the industry. Being realistic, most of the suppliers in the network, both electrolysis and fuel cells, have primarily production by hand, even today. There's some automation. So to get to the level of economies of scale in production, you need some incentives, I think, at the beginning. And it was just an idea to maybe move incentives away from fossil fuels towards hydrogen, maybe some renewables as well. This is just a thought because we've still got a long way to get there. I mean, we built the world's largest green hydrogen plant on PEM only last year, and it's only 20 megawatts. We need to get to the gigawatt level. And at the end of the day, early stage development in the next few years will be critical, but some incentives I think will be needed to get there.
Right, we are having a little bit of a time squeeze, I see. I have more questions, but I think we should open up for the questions from the floor as well. And we have a very good question here from Erika Sarmiento. What are the supportive government policies? What are the countries in Europe, Korea, Japan doing that's supportive of hydrogen growth, that's ideal for other countries, especially in Asia, that also could be implemented? I think I think many of you addressed it. Peter and Dieter, you addressed the incentives, all of you. Nicola, would you give a shot on that? What kind of incentives, government incentives, are needed to boost the hydrogen economy?
Yeah, sure. So I guess, yeah, so in Australia, we've really seen that recently the drive has been from government to subsidise the technology. So that's from like on a demonstration scale to sort of like progressively scale it from the lower end of green hydrogen production and those sort of projects. But I think what's been seen here is with sort of like renewable electricity and having targets for that, that really supports in the scaling of that. And so there is a drive here for a renewable gas target as such to allow that to also be seen as an incentive for the production of green hydrogen here. So that's one means in which it could be incentivized going forward. And I think really here we don't have the green gas certification, and so that really will mean that that it is like the gas market will be able to take hydrogen, and the fact that it's green hydrogen, and that will enable the global hydrogen market to be possible.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question that goes to more specific to Nepal here, or maybe a bit general. First of all, can hydrogen fuel be efficient? And the second question, can Nepal produce hydrogen fuel in a cost-effective way? Pushkar and Biraj, what do you see? Hydrogen fuel.
Biraj, please go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, Nepal can do it because it is a dire need in our country. Like the earlier presenters mentioned, we are also part of the world where we are heavily subsidized on fossil fuels, especially on cooking. Our cooking fuels, LPG is subsidized almost more than 30% of the value, and petrol and diesel are also subsidized. And two challenges: one, the fossil fuel will be extinct, so nobody will be producing fossil fuel just for Nepal if you don't have an alternative. And another is we are importing all the fossil fuels from the neighboring countries. So there's a huge trade deficit. Our 10% GDP is revolving around importing of fossil fuels. So at one point of time, our society should wake up and ask this question to ourselves: how do we get rid of fossil fuels in future? And that could be hydrogen. And another aspect is we have surplus hydropower. It doesn't mean that if we don't have our hydropower being exported to neighboring countries, we stop producing it, or we don't plan to produce any hydropower if it is not exported. We need to find out some alternative means to produce green energy from hydropower, to utilize it locally if we cannot export it in the regional or the local market. So that could be another motivation to go towards hydrogen. So to utilize the surplus energy or the primary renewable energy we have locally, and to meet the demand of energy intensive processes like urea production for transportation sectors and other energy sectors where we can possibly use hydrogen in our economy. If we bridge these two together, I think the cost competitiveness and technological maturity can make this happen. So it's, again, I say what we do today will make a big difference what will happen tomorrow. And I see a good possibility of Nepal being able to produce hydrogen for its local use as well, even if you cannot export it in the regional market.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I draw the similarities with Norway, which is also, very much hydropower based. We have also surplus electricity production from pure energy, as the ambassador mentioned in his opening address. And our ambition, the Norwegian ambition, is actually to be a net hydrogen exporter for green energy, but also on blue energy. Of course, we also an energy or a gas producing nation. Would it be tempting for Nepal to further expand your hydropower capacities to be actually a net exporter of hydrogen, green hydrogen, to say markets in India or even further? Would that be tempting instead of just fulfilling your own national demands?
So if I may respond, and then Biraj can contribute. So yes, that would be, I think, one of the promising options for Nepal. This productions and export of green hydrogens to India, especially utilizing the excess energy during the wet season in Nepal. And given the increased electricity demands in wet seasons, which very much coincides with higher hydropower availabilities in Nepal during the same periods. So, and then other options, that is in mind, as earlier you indicated, Dr. Noon, so about this regional integrations for hydrogen development. So where we can also think of exporting the excess electricity to India to enable hydrogen generations in the other sites in India, where the need is avoiding the storage requirement here in Nepal, so which is still evolving technologies, and the cost of storage is also not cheap, like it's going to be expensive. So these are the two options that I would say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have, I think we have room for one more question. It goes to Stephen, and that's about the situation in Pakistan. What you presented was three very, very interesting concepts or projects. One, of course, is for the microgrid of the micro run-of-river, which is a kind of a standalone, isolated project. Very good. The other one, which I find really intriguing, is your ideas about seasonal variations in electricity energy generation, where you have excess hydropower during the wet seasons, put it this way, on the flooding seasons, and then in the dry seasons there is a shortage. Does that mean that your hydropower dams capacity that can't store the water during the season? Because that could also be, in Norway, we are thinking of our hydro dams as the battery for Europe even. So we are offering this balancing services. So a further tighter integration or a more expensive or extensive integration of the grid system, would that meet these needs for seasonal balancing rather than hydrogen storage, you see?
Well, I think if you were to increase the hydro capacity of some of the big dams, such as the Tabla Dam and the Mangala Dam, then clearly you would be able to produce more electricity for maybe 1 or 2 months of the year. The economics of that would be very, very questionable. Right. Similarly, utilization issues also come into play for electrolyzers. If we're only using an electrolyzer for 1 or 2 months of the year, the business case also becomes very questionable. I think what I would say is that a bit like CCS, if you can do it, then it's probably a good idea. If you've got underground salt and you can do underground salt storage, if you can do it, it's probably a good idea. It's a very, very cost-effective way of storing very large quantities of hydrogen over long periods of time, and is, I think, in my research, perhaps the most cost-effective grid balancing mechanism in a decarbonized future.
I find that very encouraging, what the assessments that you have done, especially looking at these options in developing countries and the available technology. I did have a final question when it comes to how to deploy hydrogen value chain. What is the need for technology literacy, I would say? It is more complicated and it is more comprehensive to handle hydrogen than, for example, diesel and gasoline. What kind of knowledge, what kind of technology education, what kind of engineers or certification would one need for a pragmatic deployment of hydrogen use? Let's say for micro scale off-grid systems, combining solar with fuel cells and electrolyzers and stuff like that. Is it required that we boost up the technology education and literacy in these regions? Maybe I pass that on to Nicola, that are also working on the safety aspects of hydrogen. What do you think? Would it require a new mindset for the consumers and the users of hydrogen, because it's a technologically more challenging medium to handle?
Yeah, I think that if as an initial uptake of it, if it's done in a more centralized means to support the communities, then these sort of like hybrid systems where you're using the solar combined with the like hydrogen storage and fuel cell and then potential battery as well within the system to create that sort of energy security from the variable solar, then I think that those systems are being developed now. And so the individual technology is being looked at as a whole. And so that can be applied anywhere globally. And then you can have it centralized within the community for use for specific application for the community that may be required, or on a slightly sort of medium scale to allow that the knowledge be more centralized, and so then the individual is not at risk from the use of hydrogen.
Yeah. I think we are out of time. Thank you very much for the panelists. There are quite a few questions in the Q&A, which we may address offline, but the time doesn't allow us to continue here. So thank you very much for the panelists, and we close the panel now. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much for great discussion, everyone. Very glad to hear experts' insights. Very useful. It's good time to close session. Once again, Dr. Lund and all presenters, speakers, we appreciate your great contribution to this workshop. Thank you so much. So lastly, I would like to invite Mr. Jiwan Acharya, ADB Principal Energy Specialist, South Asia Department, to deliver his closing remark. Jiwan, hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Toru-san. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. As we have heard from the speakers and also during the panel discussion, there is a lot happening on the development of hydrogen, and it has also attracted greater interest as an energy carrier to achieve carbon neutrality. As we all know that we are discussing about this climate change impacts and how to address that as well. So with the current momentum for a rapid cost reduction and performance improvement, the technology has passed the stage of demonstration and is now ready for wide commercialization. Hydrogen energy, as we have heard, has various options in the supply chain and its project viability, and of course will depend on the country context, such as available natural resources, existing infrastructure, safety factors, and so on and so forth. So what I can conclude from the discussion today is that it's kind of a right time for our developing member countries also to start considering potential and challenges of hydrogen energy in their country. Of course, we have to recognize the differences in the capacity and the need each of these developing member countries when we talk about hydrogen. And we also have to see what kind of prospects are there at what cost. These are also very, very important. But as we can see, what happened to the solar panels, and if we achieve the further reduction in the cost in the hydrogen, this could potentially be a very good source of energy addressing energy needs in our countries in Asia. You may be wondering about what's happening from ADB side, what ADB can do. From ADB side, as my colleague Toru mentioned earlier, is that we respond to our member countries' government's request. And then we are seeing that, for example, Government of India has come up with this hydrogen mission, and some other countries are also coming up with their own plan, policies, and targets as well, so which is very encouraging. So from that point of view, if we receive a government request, and also we'll include that in our dialogue with the government in terms of what the countries should do and how it should be done, and what role that ADB together with our other development partners like Norway and others can do. I mean, just to summarize some of the things that we can do and what we can offer is, of course, on the knowledge generation and the knowledge sharing side of it, whether that's organizing workshops or handbook preparations and so on. And also help the government in their policy development, as we have also discussed earlier in our session, that having a proper policy in place is kind of a very important prerequisite. So where the strategy, roadmap, and also regulatory framework will be needed. And of course, we don't expect that all of these things to happen in one go, but I think the gradual improvement, development will be required. And there was also some discussion about this hydrogen trading platform and so on. That's something we'd also be interested to see and support. And of course, financing, because ADB being a development bank, so our more core strength will be on the financing side of it, and providing kind of a concessional financing to support the development of this, whether that's also, as in the form of pilot and demonstration, also to scale up later on. So colleagues, I hope you will allow me to call all of you as a friends of hydrogen. So now what I see is that this is a journey and we need to continue building this momentum, share lessons learned, and support each other. We are all in this one together. And please do count on ADB for our continued support and engagement in this space. I would like to take the opportunity to thank our partners, especially the Embassy of Norway, and personally to Ambassador Mr. Janssen for his support and then also giving the welcome remarks in this session, and our organizing partner Innovations Norway and all other speakers, and also the audience for their support for this session. To me, this is this continuation. I think more will happen in the coming days and months, and we look forward to building further on this and working together. Stay safe, and thank you once again. Bye-bye.